Your village is burning, and the men doing it wear the same armor as the men who are supposed to protect you, same crosses on their shields, same prayers on their lips before they ride out. The only difference is who's paying them this season. Forget the poster in your head, the shining armor, the noble oath, the knight kneeling before his king with a sword laid gently across his palms. That image is a lie built centuries after the fact, polished by novelists and painters who never smelled a battlefield. The real knight, for most of the Middle Ages, was something far colder. A landless man with a horse he couldn't really afford, a sword he'd stolen or scavenged, and a simple, brutal calculation running behind his eyes at all times. Who's going to feed me this winter? This is the story of knighthood before it became a fairy tale, when it was just violence for hire, dressed up in metal. Picture a younger son, not the heir, not the one who inherits the land, the title, the future. The second son, maybe the third, trained from childhood to fight, to ride, to kill efficiently, and given nothing to show for it, no estate waiting for him, no guaranteed income, just a horse, a sword, and the terrifying freedom of having absolutely nothing to lose. This was the engine that built the mercenary knight. In a system where land passed to the firstborn, every generation produced a surplus of armed, trained, ambitious men with no legal claim to anything. They didn't disappear. They didn't quietly take up farming. They picked up their weapons and went looking for someone who would pay them to use them. And there was always someone. A lord needing muscle for a land dispute, a bishop needing protection on the road, a merchant convoy needing an escort through territory crawling with exactly this kind of man. The knight didn't fight for a kingdom. He fought for whoever's coin was heaviest that month. Now picture the reality of that life. Because it wasn't glamorous. It was cold and it was hungry and it was uncertain in a way that should terrify you. You're sleeping in mud half the year. Your armor, if you even have proper armor, is patched and rusting, passed down or looted off a corpse that used to wear it better than you do. Your horse, your single most valuable possession, worth more than most peasants would see in a lifetime, could go lame tomorrow and take your entire livelihood down with it. There's no pension, no guild, no safety net, just the next contract, and the one after that, and the constant low hum of fear that this campaign might be the one where nobody pays you at all, because that happened, constantly. Lords ran out of money mid-campaign, wars stalled, sieges dragged on for months longer than anyone budgeted for, and the men doing the actual dying were the last people to get paid, if they got paid at all. So what happens when an army of trained killers doesn't get paid? Make it themselves. This is where the story turns genuinely ugly, and it's the part the romantic version of knighthood conveniently forgets. Unpaid mercenary companies didn't disband quietly. They turned on the countryside around them. Whole regions of medieval France and Italy lived in dread of these free companies. Bands of unemployed battle-hardened knights and soldiers who simply moved from town to town, extracting payment through terror since no one else would pay them through contract. They called it living off the land. What that actually meant was walking into a village, taking every scrap of grain, every animal, every coin, hidden under a floorboard, and burning what they couldn't carry. If you resisted, you died. If you didn't resist, you might still die. Because these men had learned that fear was a currency too, and reputation kept future villages compliant without a fight. Think about that for a second. The armored man riding toward your home wasn't an invading enemy from some foreign war. He might have fought for your own king last season. He might have prayed in your language, worshipped your saints, sworn the same knightly oaths you'd been taught to trust completely, and none of that mattered once his pay stopped coming. That's the betrayal sitting at the center of this whole era. The system asked ordinary people to trust an entire class of armed men based on a code of honor, and that code held up exactly as long as the money did, and not one day longer. If stories like this get under your skin, the gap between the myth we were taught and the ugly machinery underneath it, that's exactly the kind of history this channel keeps digging into. Not to ruin the romance for the sake of it, but because the real version is almost always stranger, and almost always says more about how power actually works. Now, here's where it gets even messier, because the line between knight and criminal wasn't just blurry. For long stretches of history, it barely existed at all. Kings and lords knew exactly what these men were, and they used it. It was standard practice to hire a free company for a campaign, work them hard, and then simply fail to pay the final installment, knowing full well the company would go pillage someone else's territory to make up the difference. Sometimes that someone else was a rival lord's land, which made the whole arrangement almost elegant from the king's perspective. Let the mercenaries do the dirty work of destabilizing an enemy region, and wash your hands of the atrocity because, officially, you never gave the order. This is the quiet horror underneath the whole system. It wasn't a bug. It was policy. Rulers built the chaos into their strategy, treating starving, unpaid soldiers as a weapon they could point in a direction and simply release. And these weren't rootless outsiders either. Some of the most feared mercenary captains climbed extraordinarily high. Men who started as landless younger sons ended up commanding armies of thousands, negotiating directly with popes and princes, richer and more powerful than half the nobility they'd once served beneath. The sword, for higher business, done well enough and ruthlessly enough, could rewrite a man's entire station in life. That was the terrifying promise underneath the terrifying reality. Enough violence, applied intelligently enough, could buy you the legitimacy that birth had denied you. So where did the shining knight come from? The one in the paintings, the one kneeling with his sword raised in service, the one every child still half believes existed? He came later. He came from troubadours, writing romantic poetry for noble court centuries, after the worst of the free companies had faded. He came from the Victorian era, which fell in love with a sanitized medieval fantasy, and printed it onto everything from wallpaper to children's books. He came from an image that was useful for justifying aristocratic power as something noble and earned, rather than what it actually was for most of history. Land held by force, defended by hired violence, and inherited by an accident of birth order. The real knights, the ones actually riding through actual villages for actual centuries, were far closer to soldiers of fortune than saints. Brave, certainly. Riding into battle for money still takes nerve. Skilled. Absolutely, years of training don't disappear just because the cause is mercenary. But noble in the way we've been taught to imagine, only when it was convenient, and only for as long as somebody kept paying. Here's what actually stays with me about this history. And it isn't the violence, though there was plenty of it. It's how easily we still fall for the same trick. We want our protectors to be motivated by something purer than money. A code, an oath, a calling. And history keeps quietly showing us that the men with swords, then and now, answer first to whoever signs the contract. The armor changes, the uniform changes, the underlying arrangement doesn't. So maybe the real question isn't whether knights were noble. Maybe it's this: how many of the people we trust today are wearing a costume built the exact same way?